Welcome to the War Story Podcast. I'm your host, Geraint Jones, and been away for a few weeks, guys. Been on vacation. In fact, I'll start the episode with a bit of a shameless plug. Been working on Voices of Victory, which is a book about the British Army's final 3 months of World War II in Europe, the fight up through Germany. The book is about, it's telling the story from the front lines, basically, the view from the muddy trench, and yeah, I've been working on that quite a lot, so got that done and dusted a few weeks ago. So went on a bit of a vacation, had a great time. If I saw you on it, it was great to see you. Thanks so much for making a great trip. And if you are interested in the book, guys, it comes out April 24th. It's also an audio book, so if you enjoy your war stories on audio, then I'm sure you'll enjoy that as well. I'm not sure if it's going to be on Spotify yet. The last book was D-Day, The Unheard Tapes. But I'll keep you posted on that. But yeah, thanks for everyone who's supported that book so far. Thanks for everyone who's supporting the podcast. As you know, all we ask is if you enjoy the episode, please share it. Share it with a friend. If you bring us a new listener for every episode you enjoy, then I'd consider that a fair trade. Got another great guest today. His name's Chris Binch. He served in the 1st Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, operations all over the world, and then a lot of private security stuff too. Really interesting guest, really enjoyed chatting with him. So without further ado, please give him a very warm welcome. Welcome on to the podcast, mate. Appreciate you giving your time. Let's just go right back to the beginning, mate. Where were you from? Where are you from? And just when was it in your life that you started to have that inclination that you might be going towards a career in the army?
Yeah, sure. No, well, firstly, thank you for having me on, pal. Look, I have inadvertently read a couple of your books as well. I've read Legion, and I didn't know it was by you until we started chatting. So, no, fair play on that, mate. Great books, and I like what you do. Yeah, for me, I'm from a place called Arnold. It's a suburb of Nottingham. Back in the day, it was a bit of a rough kind of place growing up. I grew up in the kind of 80s and 90s. And I suppose I had an uncle. My dad tried for the army like when he was younger, but never got through. I had granddads in the military. My uncle was in the kind of I think he was Army Air Corps. I did like 25 years, which is well from private to major and commissioned and stuff. So there's always like a bit of a military background, and I was fascinated with it as a kid. You know, playing in trees, dressed up, and I always looked really, really good. Everyone had like the stuff that you get from army stores, all the combat stuff that were like pretty crappy, and I had all my uncle's hand-me-down, so I was cutting around in Australian kind of real cam stuff, so I kind of loved it from an early age, to be honest. And I never did cadets or anything like that. I did a look at life where you do a week with the military. I did it with the Worcestershire Foresters, and I loved it, excelled at it, got best student out of 80 odd students. And it was then I was going to join the Worcestershire Foresters, as they were commonly known back then. And it wasn't really until we kind of went to the Army Careers Office. I literally on that day, my best mate who went on to serve in Special Forces and stuff, he was like, "Why don't we join the Paras?" And I was like, "Well, what do they do?" And he was like, "Well, same as the infantry, just jump out of planes." And I was like, "Okay, cool, well, let's do that." And that was kind of my route in, really.
And what year would that be?
97.
97. All right. So what were you kind of expecting from, the army at that time in terms of like operations or just general experiences? What did you think you'd get out of it?
Well, for me, like a lot of young kids, it was a way out. I was like involved in a lot of violent stuff when I was growing up. As we all did, went out scrapping and stuff like that. And it got a bit out of hand. They ended up getting glassed in the face, having 16 stitchings, broken nose, fractured jaw. And it was a bit like, what do I do? And I decided, well, it was either that or kind of what path. I never wanted to do the norm. Not that there's anything wrong with kind of going down the plumbing route or electrician or bricklaying, but I just wanted more out of life. I wanted more experiences. I wanted to get away from the town that I grew up in because I didn't really see any massive openings. And I just knew that the army was going to hopefully give me those experiences. It's never been about the money or anything like that as such. It was always about having the experiences and getting to travel around the world, getting paid for it, And you know the old saying that when you're in, you'll remember it as well. When you're hanging out your arse in the jungle or doing something, some force girl turn around and go, "Oh, just remember, Joe, civvies pay for this shit." You know what I mean? And it's true. And you get to go and have them experiences that you probably otherwise wouldn't have had. You know.
And how old would you be when you joined up? Yeah, had you had any other jobs or anything, or was it straight from school?
I had bits and bobs, fleeting jobs. Tried my hand at being a roofer with sort of someone's friend's dad. Bit of joinery, but no, I not really. I was straight in at 17. Got a few knockbacks. I had a few dramas with my knees. And my whole family was saying, "Oh, if you go, you know, if you're thinking about the infantry or the paras or whatever, you know, your knees and stuff, is it gonna?" And I'm probably one of them blokes. If someone tells me I can't do it, I'm like, well, watch me. You know what I mean? So that kind of got my back up when my uncle and a few other people telling me that, well, it's probably not for you. So I was like, right, I'm going infantry route, and then obviously, like we said, I went the parachute regiment route. So,
And what was the like? Because I mean, every generation always says that things were harder when you know your own generation went through. But what was like Para Depot like in '97?
well, it was a shock to the system. I can assure you of that. It weren't so much the discipline, because I always say my old man, bless him, he ruled our house with a kind of rod of iron. You know, he was dead strict, and quite rightly so. I was a bit of I was a little shit in a lot of trouble, so I needed that. So the discipline side of it was never a drama, but the fitness side I really found hard. I've always been, even at 17, I was about 85 kilo, maybe 90 kilos. So I'm a big lad at 17. So the whole running, tabbing, not so much, but the running, the fitness side of it, I kind of found really, really difficult. And going back then, 97, you know, you still probably, you know, if you messed up, you got a dig. That's just how it was, you know. You got a punch, you got a slap or whatever. You'll probably remember the same, because I think we're, you know, certainly same sort of eras, aren't we? So it was one of them, and it just yeah, you fucked up, you got a bit of a slap. So simple as, really.
What do you think about that then? Do you think that that's something that is is beneficial to recruits or detrimental?
I don't know. It's a difficult one, because that was the way it was. It's just, I can't say whether it was right or wrong. Whether I'd condone it currently, I don't know. The world's a very, very different place nowadays with stuff like that. But I'd say it never did me any harm. It was a way of learning. You know, you messed up, you got beasted, or you got a backhand, or not a backhand as such. I make that sound like it was a regular occurrence, but there were times when full screws lost their kind of shit with the urn, probably give you a bit of a dig and stuff like that. And I'm not talking full on get a kick in, but I'm sure you know where I'm coming from, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people watching this that ex-military around them times will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, a different world now. I'd like to think it probably doesn't go off now in the military. The beastings will probably still be the same, where you get thrashed and weapons above your head and all that, press ups in the corridor that we all remember with fond memories, kind of. You know.
Did you ever feel that it was personal, or was there always, you know, that was it more like you felt like it was being done? I mean, it sounds it sounds almost like the old, what they say now, like victim blaming. But was it almost like it? You know, it wasn't just random out of the blue. It would be to teach you a lesson on something that was maybe one day save your life. Might be a bit of a leading question, that, but
Yeah, no. You're right, and it was. If you messed up on safety, then you needed to be kind of ingrained into you. And I think that's massively important. You will get people watching this that have never been in them environments. So when you're kind of, if it's safety, certainly with a weapon system, if you're messing up when it comes to safety and you're pointing the weapon, you know, knock down the range and stuff like that, then I get it. And again, for people that have never been in that environment and don't understand weapon systems and the dangers of them, it's a bit hard to kind of get that across. But yeah, no, exactly that. I think it's when you messed up in a bad way that was probably safety critical and could affect someone's life, you know. So yeah.
and what were your instructors like? Because you know, did they have much operational experience, and like what kind of like, I suppose as a young soldier, you know, what was the kind of relationship between you and the way that you looked up to these people? I imagine.
Well, yeah, we still obviously kind of mid sort of end 90s, you still had a lot of Falklands veterans knocking around. And there was certainly some of them in depot when I was going through that had obviously served down south, 82 in the Falklands. So a lot of kind of experience there. And then obviously you had through the 80s and sort of early 90s, a lot of Northern Ireland tours that we all know that were rough tours, a lot of soldier and experience gained. So yeah, I'd say there was a wealth of knowledge. And I still speak to some of my instructors now, through social media and that. I'll drop them a message from time to time, and they were all sound. They were firm, very, very firm, but very, very fair. You had the odd one that I reckon if I bumped into now, I'd probably have a few words to say because I'm not 17 anymore. Yeah, it's just the way it was. Majority, I'd say 95% of the instructors I had through depot was sound.
And what about the other people going through, the other recruits? What were they all from similar kind of backgrounds? So what was that? What was it kind of the experience like of meeting all these new people and going through this experience with them?
Yeah, I mean, you had mixed ages, obviously there's some lads in the kind of mid-20s that were joining a bit later. I'd say a lot was 16, 17, 18, around the same age, from similar sort of backgrounds. Power Edge, for whatever reason, when I was going through, seemed to have there's quite a few orphans coming through that would come out of a care system and stuff like that. So in comparison to me, I had a really, really good upbringing, a strict upbringing, but my parents, absolutely awesome people, working class. So yeah, I think it was a lot of working class kind of guys in there that were coming through at the same time as me. So, and the friendships for life, we talk about it a lot, but you kind of do form friendships for life. I think when you're coming through depot, when you certainly put through them experiences and them stresses, they're bonds that you carry through, into adulthood. And I can still bump into them from time to time now, not seen them in 20 years. And it's like I saw them yesterday. I know you'll definitely be able to relate to that one.
Well, how is it decided then when you go through, Power Edge Depot? How is it decided which battalion will go on and serve in? Is there any kind of, do you have any kind of say in that, or is it just whoever needs numbers at the time?
I think back then all three battalions were pretty much the same, 1, 2, and 3 para. It was whoever was short. And I remember coming through, everyone wanted to go to 2 para because had the most battle honours at the time. It was kind of one of the most famous battalions. So everyone wanted to go to 2 para, but it was just how it fell and how it was short. Moving forward to current times, 1 para now, kind of widely known as SFSG, supporting SF. So I don't think recruits now go straight from depot to 1 para. You have to go to 2 or 3 para, serve a bit of time in them battalions before you can then go to 1 para. And I think you have a little selection process for 1 para now, because obviously they support SF directly and do some pretty good stuff. So not straight out of depot,
And what about when you kind of, well, actually, let's talk about when you passed out, because obviously it's a big moment for any para. So what was that day like for you when you got to the end of your training and got your berry?
Well, I feel like for me, it was extra special because for a long time, I never really talked about this. I was a bit ashamed of my experiences through depot. So I did P Company 3 times in 6 months, failed twice, completed 3 full P companies, failed twice, just didn't accumulate enough points. Niggles and injuries, as a lot of lads did. There's no excuses. I just wasn't up to the standard of fitness because of various bits and bobs. So when I finally did pass out on the 3rd time, I don't know many other people that have done P Company 3 times in that short space of time. So for me, when I got the maroon berry on the square, having the 3rd attempt, it was like still up there as probably one of the proudest moments of my whole kind of life,
So how does that work with the points then? What kind of system is that for you to pass P company?
Well, if you come off anything like the log race or the stretcher race back then, or the P Company 10 miler, if you didn't complete them or you came off the log or the stretcher, like I say, it's pretty much a fail. At the end, you pretty much fail. And I struggled on the 10 miler. I think I came round within the time limit, but behind the main pack. And I think it's just based on a kind of point scoring system that you accumulate. I don't know. They don't tell you how many points you need. But I just think it's an accumulated system. If you're kind of at the back of everything, you're not going to accumulate the the points required. I'm pretty certain that's how it works. I think they keep it very cloak and dagger, and you never know until you stood on that square waiting to receive your berry whether you're going to get a pass or a fail.
Oh, so you don't find out until you have to actually go on parade, and then you find out at that point.
Yeah, they call your number out, and you slam your tabs in, come to attention, and then they'll shout pass or fail. And if you fail, you turn to the right, march off, and stand on your own with the rest of the failures. So it's like it is horrid when you get that fail.
Like, of the guys that failed, would everyone stick around to try it again, or would some people at that point decide that it wasn't for them?
There's a lot of people that transfer to other units. I know a lot of guys that went across to the rifles or kind of the green jackets back then, or different units. They'd done it once and just thought that's it for me. A lot of people do get through on their second attempt, but again, I think I know a handful, if that, of people that have done it 3 times. So I'm kind of now I wear that as a little bit of a, not a badge of honor, but I'm immensely proud that I stuck around and I had the kind of mental resilience to actually see it through. And I nearly didn't. After the second time, I went into the office, slammed my tabs into the depot screws, and said, "Look, I don't know whether I can do this a third time." And I saw a human side to one of the 4 screws. He took me in the office, sat me down, which was like unheard of, like had a brew, and he was like, "Look, you've got it in you to be a good paratrooper. You just got to get through P Company." Because I never had any dramas with the soldiering side of things. I've always been good at that sort of thing. It was just that fitness back then. Strangely, later on down my life, when I left the military, I got obsessed with fitness. I still am now, and I've probably been fitter out of the military than I ever was in. It's weird.
So what was it then that gave you that mental resilience to keep going back for the second and third time? And if you feel like, was it a case of you just going to keep going, no matter how many attempts it took you?
No, I don't know really. I think that prep talk was I remember the prep talk. He was like, if you do not get that maroon berry and you've set out to get it, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And I don't like having regrets. I've got a couple from my military time, not going on selection. It's the holy grail of obviously the military. If you're an infantryman, you want to go on selection. And look, whether I'd have passed or not's a different story, but I didn't, and it's a big regret. So I never wanted to have any regrets. I wanted to do what I could do, and I set myself out to be in the paras, and that's what I was going to do. I don't know whether I'd done it at a 4th time. I'm not going to lie. I don't even know if they'd have let me do it a 4th time, to be honest.
So when you passed out, then would you be 18 by this point? By the time you,
yeah, 18 when I passed out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I should ask as well. Obviously, I've always found it interesting with the paras that you have to kind of become a para before you can actually jump out of the plane. By which point you might find out that you really don't like it. But what was it like for you going out of an aircraft for the first time?
Look, anyone that tells you that they like military parachuting, they're either psychotic or lying, right? There is no 2 ways about it. It is, yeah, and it's right at the end of I think now they actually go to battalion because of funding. They go to battalion without their wings, which is, I'm not sure I'd want to be in that position, but for when I went through the end of training, you did 4 weeks surprise, Norton. Jumped out of a sky van. Gone are the days of balloon. Used to do the balloon jump for your first jump, but that got sacked off. So you do 1 jump out of a sky van, which is like a little biplane that sits maybe 6 or 8 people in, out the back, easy jump, and then 7 jumps out of a Hercules back then C-130, and 1 night jump as well. And it's just horrendous, you kind of, nothing prepares you for jumping out that side door of a Hercules at about 150 mile an hour with kind of kit strapped to you. And it's not fun. It's not like free fall. I've done a bit of free fall as well. It's not like free fall where you're kind of floating around, looks really alley. Military jumping's harsh. There's a lot of people being sick, low level, aircraft fuel smell. And it's just hot, stinking, and yeah, it's just not fun. But it's a necessity, it's what we do. And I say it's what we do, and they're not jumped in a long time, but it's part of the role,
On that note, then, because I think you look at it. I mean, I've just been recently working on a book. They did the Rhine crossing, and just the amount of casualties from planes getting shot out of the sky, and that was 80 years ago. And you look at it now and you think, you know, is that ever something that's going to take place again? Because of, the way that now we have our, if you have one soldier killed now, it makes the news, doesn't it? Like if you had an aircraft go down with everyone on board, then you can't even imagine what that would do for, like, politically and for the military. But is there something to be said for just kind of how, like you say, like how horrendous military parachute jumping is, that even if you don't actually do that operationally, it's almost worth putting people through it just to kind of, that almost level. I don't know if like toughness is the right word or something, but you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it is, and as kind of Monty said, Montgomery, it's about conquering fear by jumping out of an aircraft, and there is something to be said, because it's not for everyone. You can be the toughest, best infantryman on the planet, but if heights and jumping out of a plane is not your thing, you're not going to do it. And there's a lot of people there that want to not do it, but you do it because you push yourself and you challenge yourself. I have these conversations. I used to have these conversations. I'm too old now to kind of argue with people on social media, and people go, "Oh, what's the point of the paras? All they do is jump out of planes." And I always say it's the training to get you to the point. The jumping out of the plane bit's the easy part. It's the fitness, it's the training and how hard the training is. And I take nothing away from other infantry. I've worked with some absolutely outstanding guys from all of the units when I did close protection, which we'll probably come on to. But back then you're brainwashed into believing, it's the be all and end all. And it's good. It creates that camaraderie. It creates that brotherhood. But it's the training that makes the kind of paratrooper, that 28 weeks training, the fitness, the getting smashed, getting through the injuries, and the jumping out of planes bit at the end is just kind of Slipper City bit, really, at Bryce Norton, eating your steak and lobster and stuff, and all the great things that the RAF get.
So what was it like when you turned up at your battalion? Was it two para that you went to? Yeah.
Yeah, straight to Jupiter. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it? What was it like then to be a new bloke at two para at the time?
Well, I always talk about this. So because I did 3 P companies, I milled twice the first P company, milled twice the second. A milling, for the people that are watching, is where you fight someone with 16-ounce gloves on, no blocking, no boxing. You just punch each other for a minute. It's dead daunting. It's not for everyone. And like I say, because I'm a big guy and I boxed a little bit before that, I end up like stopping the 2 people that I've milled on the first time, stopping the 2 people on the second P company. So when I rocked up at Battalion, I had this nickname given to me by the depot staff as Hammer Hands. Now, as an 18-year-old rocking up at 2 para in Aldershot with all these hairy arse paratroopers, Falklands veterans and everything else, that is not a reputation you want. Because people come looking for you, like, who's this Hammerhands bloke? Then you're like, oh God, as an 18-year-old thinker. So yeah, it was for the first few months until people kind of figured out I was an all right person, that I wasn't some sort of bully or anything like that. It was absolutely, it was all right after that. But it's hard for any young lad rocking up at battalion, whichever unit you turn up at, coming out of depot. You're going into almost like the lion's den of seasoned soldiers that have been on ops. And you're wet behind the ears, aren't you? You don't know anything. You don't know your arse from your elbow, just what you've been taught in depot, so to speak.
And how long did it take before you kind of become accepted by these people that you're now living and working with?
It depends, really. So I was really lucky. I went straight from Catterick, where we obviously do our phase 2 training, and passed out and went straight to pretty much within a month straight out to Northern Ireland, straight onto Northern Ireland training, and straight out on a tour. So you get like that badge of honor. You've been on a tour, you've proven yourself. So yeah, it was probably that 6-month tour that you're then accepted. You're shown that you can do the job, you can patrol, you can do all the soldiering stuff, and you're not a muppet. So, and then when you come back, you have to be in sort of 6 months to a year before they let you get your sort of parachute regiment tattoo. It sounds very cheesy now looking back at it, but I couldn't wait to get a parachute regiment tattoo. I was everything para reg, loved it. So yeah, after 6 months, I got a nod off kind of some of the senior blokes, like, yeah, you've proved yourself, you can go and get a tattoo. So I went and got 2, as you do. So yeah.
Have you ever come across anyone who got a tattoo before they were allowed by the senior blokes to go and get it?
Oh yeah, it was. If no one gave you permission, you got a bit of a rough time. You know what I mean? It was just one of the things. And again, I can't speak now. It's 20 odd years ago, but back then, yeah, you had to wait till someone came to you and said, "Yeah, yeah, you're fine. You can go on." It's the same as the overhangs in the berries. You know,
Right.
you have like the depot berry that's like looks very World War II-ish, so to speak. But once you've been in a bit, you could put an overhang in and start buying your own kit. Because back then the military kit was shocking. I'm sure you'll kind of remember as well, like cardboard boots near enough. So yeah, once you've been in a few months, you could start buying your own kit and equipment and stuff. So
what about going on the piss with the blokes as well? Because I've been told that you had to get invited, like you weren't allowed into town until you were invited. Is that something that you kind of saw as well?
yeah, definitely. Like obviously the Traff in Aldershot, the Trafalgar Inn was like the Reg pub, you know, the Parachute Regiment pub. So you had to wait until someone kind of said to you, "Oh, do you fancy a beer in the Trafalgar?" And walking in that pub again, the sights I've seen in there, I cannot repeat on here. Um, for
No,
obvious reasons.
I stick explicit on the warning for this for a reason.
Look, it's just it's bonkers. Like board paratroopers when they're not on ops are an absolute nightmare. I actually had my old commanding officer on my podcast, and he was saying it was never a drama managing the guys when they're on ops because they want to be there. They want to do the soldiering stuff. It's when you're back at camp and board paratroopers, board soldiers, that's when the dramas start to happen. So yeah, you had to wait for an invite downtown certainly, and then you can't. That was it. Then you were in. Yeah,
Let's go off topic or off chronology a little bit here then, and go into that. So, like you said, you've got, especially in regiment like the parachute regiment, people have joined to do ops. What's your kind of opinion on like the 6-month tour system, as opposed to just being like, like say Second World War, you join up, like let's just use Northwest Europe for an example. You go to Normandy and you're staying, you might get a bit of leave, but you're staying in Europe until the war's won and the job's done. So what was your kind of like opinion on like the 6-month tour kind of rotation system?
yeah. They got a bit much, you know. This 6-month tours, you were always counting down. You were wanting to kind of get back. It was good when you initially the first couple of months, but then obviously like this, the tours of Northern Ireland, and I'm always dead honest about the tours that I did. All of the tours, they were all fairly much eventful. There was bits and bobs of things that were going off, but nothing major. Not like the later tours of Afghanistan and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just the 6 months tours. I think the best tour I did was the Sierra Leone tour because that was called off leave, fired into Sierra Leone to do a job, and I think I was there about 32 days. So that was perfect. You go and you do an op and then you're extracted. It was like how you wanted it to be. Yeah, the 6-month tours. It depends. It depends on your situation. I was a young lad at the time, and I didn't have a girlfriend or anything like that. So it was good. You weren't that bothered. You got a bit of leave in the middle. You save lots of money, usually to pay off a load of debt that you'd spent accumulating while you were on the lash. So yeah, I see where you're coming from. But I don't think that'd happen in current climates. Again, it's a different world. There'd be uproar if people got sent for long periods of times to war zone. Now we live in a different world, don't we? So I don't think we'd ever see that happening again, personally. But
Yeah, I've always found it interesting because it's, yeah, you're away for 6 months, but then what it got like, you come back and you're straight into the training cycle for the next one, where you're actually away a lot during that as well. And I definitely see two sides of the argument for it. But like, yeah, the main one being that, like you said, if someone's got wife, kids, that kind of thing, I mean, the divorce rates and all that stuff they are, aren't they?
yeah.
All right, mate. So talk us through then, like on these Northern Ireland tours, what would you kind of, what role were you doing out there? And what, like, you kind of mentioned that, the kind of threat level and stuff, but were you seeing like were things changing every time you went back and forth? Were things, because obviously we're moving towards the kind of into the peace process and stuff. So did you see like a different change in face of what you were doing in operations there?
Yeah, look, the Northern Ireland thing, looking back on it now, is always a kind of a weird thing because, you're patrolling around like like your local city, your local town. You're just kind of, so looking back on it, it was bizarre because you're carrying weapons, there's people out shopping. It's not like you're in kind of, the environment's the same. It's the UK, isn't it? So it's like patrolling your local town. You're not in a faraway country like Iraq or Afghanistan where the culture is different, the whole situation and, people's lives are completely different. So yeah, I always found them a little bit odd, but I always say about the Northern Ireland tours, they were absolutely brilliant for soldiering, especially as a young 18-year-old, flying around in helicopters, patrolling at night, kind of planning sort of ops, being part of planning stuff. So I always thought them tours were brilliant for kind of bringing you on as a soldier. I think the 3 tours I did 2 6-monthers, one of East Tyrone's at Auchnacloy. I did a 6-weeker in the same Auchnacloy. I went out there to kind of for 6 weeks just to kind of save some money to buy a car. No one wanted to go over Christmas, so I was like, well, this is an opportunity for me to go out there and save a bit of money so I can buy my first car. And then the last tour I did, sort of 2003, was Besbrook, and kind of around that kind of area. They were all the same. You had players, you pulled over some of the well-known faces and players. Sometimes they'd be a bit anti with you. Sometimes they'd be a bit just absolutely sound. So you never knew. As far as incidents and shootings and stuff, nothing while we're there. But I know they happened around that time because I think it was someone from another unit sadly lost their life, I think in 97. I think that was probably one of the last fatalities out there. So the threat was there, but personally, and it's easy, very, very easy to get complacent because of the things I've just said in Northern Ireland, because you feel like you're walking around your local town,
Yeah, I mean, I never did Northern Ireland, but like I can't really wrap my head around what it would be like to, because if you're in Afghanistan, if you're in Iraq, when you come back, you might get stressed out over, say, like a built-up area, a busy area or something, because you're kind of a bit overtuned for looking for threat and that kind of thing. I can't imagine what that must be like when it looks just the same as your own hometown. You know what I mean? Like that's got to add a whole other level of making it difficult for people to kind of decompress when they come off tour. Did you, when you were out there, Len, like with these kind of ops that were going on, was that just kind of like the expectation of the kind of things that you'd be doing in that period? Like, because obviously 9/11 was still a little off the horizon on your first tour. Was that just something you thought this will probably be my military career, Northern Ireland tours and, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was. And, sadly, or, well, depends which way you want to look at it. If you joined after 82 in the Paras, the tours that you went on were predominantly rotations of Northern Ireland. There wasn't a lot going off. And I always feel a little bit bad for some of the kind of troops that were in, because you could do, your full career joining after the Falklands and not really seeing a hell of a lot. Yet you joined a bit later, like 2000 or 1999, and spent your 22 in probably the busiest period that the British Army has ever seen since the Second World War, So yeah, for me, I didn't really see a lot on the horizon. So obviously when Sierra Leone came about, and that was like the first real thing that had happened in a long time, and we got sent out there, it was like, well, this is different. This is new. I went from being on the piss in Tenerife with my best mate 24 hours later to patrolling Freetown in Africa, in Sierra Leone. So I was a bit like, wow, this is crazy. As like a 19-year-old lad. So
talk us through that Sierra Leone op then. How did it come about and what were you doing out there?
well, like I say, I'd gone on leave after TESX. Remember the TESX exercise that used to do usually February, Salisbury Plain, with a laser kit against sort of an armored division and stuff like that. We used to do that kind of every year or every 2 years. And we'd just come back off that. So kit was packed, your admin was done. And we went on leave, and I went to Tenerife. And while we were in Tenerife, my old man rang me and said, have you look at the news? You've had a phone call saying you've got to get back. And I was like, right, okay. I was coming back anyway, luckily. So I got a flight back, shot straight down to Colchester. And And yeah, we were literally the people getting on the coach there and then. And what had happened was one para were the kind of main battle group to be sent, but they were missing a company. One of their companies was on an overseas exercise, I think over in the sort of Belize or Jamaica kind of area.
It was.
Yeah, and then we needed to basically fill that gap. So our OC got a phone call saying, "Can you get your company together? Can you get a company of men together in the next sort of 3 days, 24 hours, or whatever it was?" And he did. And we had a kind of mixed bag of people from support company, from HQ company, just as we patched together a company, and off we went, deployed out to Syria. And yeah,
And what was the purpose of the deployment? What was the mission out there?
I don't know the exact. All I know from my memory is they had the West Side boys, the rebels that were coming in. Basically, it was a bit of a genocide. They were coming in from the mountains, off their faces on various drugs and everything else, and just killing the local population. So I know 2-2 had been deployed and were out there already. And then we kind of deployed out there and kind of flew out. And it was a bit of that was when we flew in. So we flew in on C-130s, and we were all on the back of Chinooks. We'd landed somewhere on C-130s, and then we got on Chinooks. How I remember it might not be completely the case, but I remember sitting on the back of either a C-130 or a Chinook and being told to load and make ready your weapons. We're going into a hot kind of landing zone. So I was a bit like, okay, this is real now. And I always joke about this fact. So we'd all like loaded our weapons, compiling off the back of this aircraft, whichever it was. And the RAF were there washing vehicles with the tops off in this kind of base. And we were like, really? So I don't know whether it was a wind up or what, or wrong in, you know how the information sometimes get passed. But yeah, that was a secure kind of airbase. And then that was it. We're out on patrol around Freetown looking for the kind of West Side boys, almost, I suppose, picking a fight with them, waiting for them to come to us, so we could take it to them because of what they were doing. And it never, again, sadly, it never materialized. I think the closest we came, we were on a bridge, and we were informed that there was about 2,500 West Side boys making their way towards this bridge. And we had to reinforce the bridge in 40-degree heat in Africa, sandbagging it, build it up. And we were all set, like stood to on this kind of bridge VCP, waiting for these West Side boys to come. And sadly, they never, I think they bottled it personally, but yeah, they never turned up.
What were your impressions of Sierra Leone and Freetown?
I mean, it's a beautiful country, absolutely beautiful, but the carnage caused by the West Side boys, you know, there was bodies in streets and stuff, and you know, where they were coming. There's no secret of the fact they came in from the jungle and they started hacking up local population, you know, chopping people's hands off. They used to ask them if they wanted a short sleeve or a long sleeve, and then they chop off the hands, or they chop off their arm just for the fun of it, you know. So nasty pieces of work. So I mean, if they'd have actually it had materialized, I think we would have had a fight on our hands with them, because there wasn't that many of us, and it was arguably there was a lot of them. But yeah, I think we just went in, scared them off, and that was it. The situation got so. I know there was a lot of troops on the ground for quite a lot of time after that, kind of basically keeping them at bay, and then obviously it settled down after that. So yeah.
Could you see like evidence of people walking around with missing hands and stuff like that?
Yeah, we'd patrol and we'd see people with kind of missing limbs and stuff that we assumed and was put down to kind of what they were doing. It was horrendous what they were doing. That itself is even playing it down. There was a lot worse. The what they were doing. They were kind of picking pregnant women and guessing the sex of the baby, then cutting them open, and just pulling out the fetus and stuff like that. You know, horrendous stuff. All off the face on various kind of local kind of drugs and extracts that they took. So yeah, really nasty pieces of work, you know.
And what was the local population's kind of response and attitude to having you there?
No, it was really positive. It was really positive. They were kind of really happy that they had this force that were kind of there for good, you know, patrolling around, and I think it made them feel safe, and everything else. And like I say, it definitely stopped them. They never ventured into the towns that we saw while we were there. They stayed well out of the way in the jungles and stuff like that. Now, I don't want to get the tour that I did mixed up, and claim that I was involved in anything, but the later on tour, that was 1 para and 2 SES, where they rescued 5 hostages, 5 Royal Irish officers, I believe, that were kidnapped. That was a few months down the line. We'd gone home, and then that had happened, and the SES had gone in to sort of put in a search and rescue mission.
So when you left them, were you a bit disappointed to have not got into a scrap with this group?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it had all the kind of look. I liken it, and again, people won't probably grasp it. They probably are. Thank God for that. You went there and nothing happened. But you're a former soldier. I'm a former soldier. You join the military to do soldier stuff, to be a soldier, to get into to go to them environments, and that's what you want to do. It's like being a firefighter your whole career and never putting out a fire, or being a footballer and never kicking a football. It's what you want to do. So yeah, there was a disappointment that we came back and we didn't get into a scrap with them, So yeah, a bit disappointing.
How much of that do you reckon is, how much of that wanting to be, like, because you said it's not really normal to want to be in a life or death scrap with somebody for most people, but it is normal for a certain amount of people. How much of that do you reckon you're born with, and how much of that do you reckon is the result of kind of like training? Like, I guess it's like the nature nurture kind of question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I believe you're born into what's called the flight or fight syndrome. I believe you've got that in you, or you haven't. And I take nothing away. Like, sometimes if people want to like turn around and get themselves out of that environment and run away for preservation of life, I fully understand that. But you're either, and you see it all the time. I think you see it on some of the terror attacks, sadly, that have gone, on home soil, where you'll get certain individuals that will run and hide. Absolutely fine. That's what they want to do. And then you will get certain individuals that will charge head on to try and confront that threat and try and eliminate it. And I think a lot of people that go into the military have that in them to kind of fight rather than kind of flight. So I do believe it's ingrained into you. You've either got that in you, or you haven't. It's just my personal opinion. I can't be 100%.
That's a great way of putting it, because like the terror attacks, I think that's a great example, because, often these people, it'll be, John the Builder, who's never been in the military, so that takes away that training, the question about the training, right? Because they've never had that training. But like you said, there's something in them that just, makes them act that way. I find that fascinating, mate, to be honest. And obviously, like in a regiment like the Parachute Regiment as well, how much is it kind of put into you the importance of, let's say, like upholding basically like the regimental traditions and everything? How much is that on your mind when you go on an operation like that? Knowing about Arnhem and D-Day and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think so as well. Your history is ingrained into you. You're taught it as soon as you start in depot. They talk to you about it, and you have to learn it. You get tested on it, and a lot of people join the Parachute Regiment over the. I was aware of bits and bobs of the Parachute Regiment, not overly. Like I said, it was a bit like, oh, what do they do? I knew of them from the Falklands. Obviously, because the Falklands was a big thing when I was growing up. I mean, I was only 2 in 82, but I remember it being heard of it when I was growing up in the 80s and stuff. But yeah, I think it's more so not letting your sort of comrades down, your teammates and stuff like that. It's part of. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, I realise my camera's on right over this side.
Oh, don't worry, mate. We only use the audio anyway, mate.
Oh, right, okay. So yeah, I think it's more not letting your team members down. I think that's the biggie. And like every career, every profession I've done from there on in, it's not like kind of why we're there or the job I'm doing. It's just not the failure of like disappointing the people that you're working with. And I think that's a really good thing when you work in a team. If you've got that mindset to not want to let the team down, I think that makes you a better soldier or, team member. Because yeah, you don't want to also embarrass yourself. You don't want to embarrass the team. So I think that is a part of it. And certainly in the Parachute Regiment, I always say this now, looking back, sounds corny again, but it's like a cult. Parachute Regiment's like a cult. You want to be there. You're kind of everything Parachute. And that's what makes them. I'm beyond that now. Like I say, I'm in my mid-40s now. But looking back, I understand it, because that makes the unit as in my opinion, as good as it is because of that sort of brotherhood and that cultness about it, you know.
So, okay, so let's talk about before we get on to where I was like, the 9/11 moment, which obviously was a defining moment for like a lot of soldiers of our kind of generation. Was there any other tours in like the late 90s, early 2000s that you got on?
Yeah, so I did the Macedonia tour, which was like weapon collection, and again, brilliant tour for soldiering. We're out in OPs, out in the sticks, kind of really bringing you on as a soldier. And there was scope there again. You had a lot of these rebels and people coming in and disarming them, so handing in weapons, amnesties. Uh, and obviously you've got two rival factions there with religion and stuff like that. So it was a hotbed for something to happen. And obviously Kosovo was, I think, a couple of years prior to that. And obviously there was stuff that happened in Pristina. There was like some of the troops there that got into scraps for the kind of local militia and stuff like that. So yeah, again, all these tours, there was definitely scope for stuff to happen. And then obviously I did probably one of the first ever Afghanistan tours straight after 9/11. 9/11. Sorry.
Before we get into it, so the Macedonia one, that was like what, like a bit of a spillover from Kosovo, was it?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that whole area, former Yugoslavia and stuff like that, they had a lot of stuff going off. Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, it's all part of kind of the same area. And obviously it was, we all know about the Bosnian conflict and the atrocities that happened there. So this was part of that and kind of the tail end of what was happening, on the back end of kind of the Bosnia and stuff like that.
So had it experienced a similar kind of thing to Kosovo, or was this almost like a getting out ahead of the problem?
Yeah, I think that was it. It was kind of literally cool it down before it fully. I mean, I don't know. God, back then I didn't really pay that much attention. It was a case of, oh, where are we going? Send us. I was a young lad, but I think yeah, it was kind of try and cool it down before it kind of escalated into another Kosovo kind of situation. I could be wrong, but that's how I kind of see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, I mean, let's talk about then post 9/11. Can you remember like that 9/11 moment where you were and what you thought it meant at the time?
I was in Macedonia actually when 9/11 kicked off. So we all sat watching it on telly and we were like, right, okay, we know we're going somewhere in the Middle East. We didn't know who was responsible at the time. But the kind of reports came back that it was Islamic, it was bin Laden pretty quickly, didn't they? They within a few days it was kind of pinned on, I'm not getting into conspiracies and stuff, but very, very quickly it was like, right, it's a Middle Eastern kind of, they're the culprits, someone over there in the Middle East. So, but that's where we're going to probably be going at some point.
Yeah. I mean, what did you, like, how did you feel watching it?
Oh, it was just like, yeah, I still now look at it. If any footage pops up, and it does on the anniversaries, pops up. It's kind of big. I'm obviously like we'll come on to. I'm a firefighter now, so obviously a lot of loss of life for firefighters in New York at the time. So it comes up anniversaries and stuff, and I still like the moment I watched it for the first time, I just couldn't get my head around it. Didn't seem real. It was just like, is this really happening? And I think I share that with a lot of people. It was hard to kind of comprehend and get your head around on the mass scale that it was.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, if you saw that now on a Instagram or whatever, you'd think that someone had used AI to make a reel or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was so hard. Even then, when you trusted what you saw, it was just this idea of seeing that. Just I totally agree, mate. I don't think it's ever sunk in for me what you were seeing. If you know what I mean, I totally with you on that one. So how long was it? How long was it then before you got your orders to kind of go and take part in the response to that?
Well, I think we came back. I think we went on summer leave. I think, and then there was the kind of, I could be right. I'm a time scale again. I don't know, but I think we were back in the UK for a bit of a period of time. Um, I think we may have done Canada. We done Canada and Belize while I was in as well, but I can't remember where they fit into that. And I think they may have been a bit before, to be honest. But yeah, it was kind of, it wasn't long. and we got the rumblings. You know what rumor control's like in the military. It was like, oh, we're going next week. We're going to Afghanistan, or you know what I mean. And then rumblings start, and then before you know it, then rumblings become the truth. And then we kind of went on, if I remember it right, started some build-up training for it. And then we kind of got our orders. And I ended up flying out to Oman, I think, New Year's Eve 2001. So yeah, flew out to Oman, had about a week there, and then flew straight into kind of Bagram airfield in Kabul. Like,
What was Bagram like in the early days of the Afghanistan? Then was it like I have no idea about this. Was it built by the Americans at the beginning, or was it an existing airbase?
I can't remember, to be honest with you. I think it was just, again, it was all, there was nothing, obviously, because later tours, sort of Bastion down south, Helmand province, they had a full camp in place. But this was like, no one had ever been over there before. So, I mean, it was an air base, but I don't think it was secured very well. And I might actually be, this is what I've said to you, my brain, I've had too many punches to the head, pal, to be fair, over the years. And I can't remember whether, when I said about the Sierra Leone one or the Afghanistan one, I can't remember which one was which, but one of them is the one where we ran off the back of the aircraft. And it might have even been the Afghan tour, to be honest. But I think it was the Sierra Leone one. But anyway, all I remember when we got there, it was absolutely freezing. It was like -10, which people don't usually associate with Afghanistan. But obviously it was winter, and it was freezing. And we were there was no camp as such. We ended up in some sort of old schoolhouse, I think it was, or some building, no windows in it. So it wasn't a camp. We had to fortify it ourselves, and it was just in the middle of town. So if anyone wanted to overrun that at any point, they could have done. It was like loosely, we made it by the end of the tour, we made it kind of fortified and stuff. But yeah, it was just unheard of, that kind of stuff at that time, that what we were doing. So yeah.
What was the reception like from from the local population when you got on the ground? And had the Taliban had they left? Did they put up a fight?
I think it wasn't obvious who the Taliban were, to be honest. And people, I think you were kind of welcomed to a certain extent. I think there was that kind of standoffish, who are these kind of people? What are they doing here? And there was that kind of look of, who are we kind of thing? Are we here for good? We know the history of Afghanistan. It's had lots of people try and take it over and be involved in conflicts there. So I think the locals were no stranger to seeing troops on the ground. We were just a different sort of nation of troops out there, and again, it was a great tour for going around, and we had some really hairy moments where you had curfews and stuff, and we had standoffs with police late at night where guns pulled, everyone kind of twitchy fingers and stuff like that. But thankfully, nothing ever really. I think our snipers ended up and our patrols ended up with some sort of altercation with a gunman from the palace, where they ended up shooting dead a gunman. But I think, as far as that kind of stuff, that early tours, yeah, again, there was nothing, again, scope for stuff, but just nothing really metabolized, until later down the line, when obviously guys like yourself, I think did you do Southern Afghanistan?
Yeah, 2009.
Yeah, and obviously I can never compare to what I did in the military to what the guys did. I'm always open about that. What you guys did in Southern Afghanistan is pale in comparison to what we did, But I always say I was prepared to go wherever I was sent at that period of time. And just so happens that I never got on one of those. I was always gutted about not getting on one of them, but I was well out then. I was already working abroad by then. So.
Well, mate, I feel the same way about 2006 to 2009, to be honest, mate. But hardly look at the drawing. I was just going, I just look at, so the Russians left Kabul in 89. So, as you're saying, I mean, when you're a 23-year-old or whatever, you're out on these tours, 12 years seems like a lifetime, doesn't it? But now we're in our 40s, it's like, you realize that years is a blink of an eye. And so, yeah, I mean, these, like you said, mate, these people would have been very, like most adults there would have known, I almost said occupying forces, but let's just say foreign forces there. So how long did you spend out in Kabul?
I think we were there 4 months in total. 4 months straight through. I don't think there was any R&R and stuff like that because it's just the nature of the kind of the operations and stuff. But it was more like show of presence, a lot of joint patrols with the police force, joint patrols with their army, and just kind of like show. I think we were there as part of ISAF. Does that sound about right? I think it was ISAF back then, whatever that stands for. So we was more like a peacekeeping force, if you like, to kind of almost deter the kind of Taliban, because obviously what was happening up in the, I think it was up in was it the caves in, where was the caves at where they kind of did a lot of the
Tora Bora Caves.
that's it, the Tora Bora caves. So I think it was more of a reassurance thing, and joint patrols and stuff. I mean, again, I don't know the ins and outs of a lot of the reasons while I was there. I think if I was older, if I was when I was in my late 20s, I'd have probably questioned a bit more and been a bit more, because I was late teen, early 20s. It was more like I didn't really pay that much of an interest. It was just like, I'll go where they send me and I'll do as I'm told when I'm there. I don't know whether that's the right attitude or not, but it was just, that was my age and probably a little bit of immaturity as well back then,
Yeah, mate, the army would be the bad way if soldiers start thinking them too much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But like, so were you able to have interactions with the locals? Would you be able to talk to them? Were there English speakers there?
Yeah, we had interpreters that would go on patrol with us, and you know what? A lot of them great, sort of really welcoming for the best part of it. Never really any dramas. Like I say, there was a look of almost a standoffishness because they didn't know what to expect from us. Like you say, in living memory, the Russians were there, and obviously we know Russians did some pretty nasty stuff to the Afghan local population and stuff like that. So I get the kind of cautiousness behind it, but genuinely, people were kind of welcoming. They made us bread. They brought us a lot of supplies in and stuff like that. And while we're out on a patrol, you get, you'd stop at market stalls and stuff, and people would try and exchange stuff with you. We try and exchange stuff for them for the crappy rations that we had. So it was just like part and parcel. It was like a peacekeeping mission, and it was just like a show of presence, show of unity, just to kind of let the kind of Taliban forces or whatever they were called back then, let them know that we're there. If you come in and start terrorizing the local population, you've got a fight on your hands.
Did you come across many other nationalities, militaries while you were there?
I think there was I believe some Dutch there. I think there was some Dutch, and I'm sure some Americans. We bumped into some Americans, but again, as my memory fades as I get older, I'm not entirely sure. But I remember us being in green kit because there was no money. Like the late 90s and 2000s, if you recall, it wasn't a lot of money in the British Army because nothing had happened. So why would they inject any? A bit like what's happening now. They're making cuts and everything's cutting because there's no real conflicts going off in the world that involves us. So when there's no conflicts, they don't plow any money in. So we were out in Afghanistan, which is a desert environment, in full-on green kit, because there was no money for desert camp. It wasn't until obviously 2006, I think, the first real indication of what was to come with the 3-para in kind of Helmand province, that the government then went, well, you know what, we probably need to inject a bit of cash into I know obviously Iraq happened and stuff, but the same sketch, I don't think there was a lot of money injected into the military after Iraq,
Well, I know, yeah, I remember seeing a lot of photos of guys in mixed desert and camp and green kit using Iraq and stuff. And yeah, it's funny when I mean, you think how hard could it be to keep like just a few spare deserts in a warehouse or something? But like I said, you're always, I can't remember the exact saying, but it's basically like the kit that you get given for the current war is the kit that you needed for the last war. And that's kind of, you're always working like one war behind. Like we've probably got brilliant stuff now for doing like an Afghanistan tour again, but
yeah,
now it's looking like the stuff that we had in the Cold War is probably what you want, right?
yeah.
You want fucking armor brigades and everything. So, yeah. So was that your final tour of the Patters?
Well, I did the final tour was actually the Northern Ireland one, the Besbrook.
Oh yes,
and all that kind of stuff was starting to close down. They were starting to wrap up with Northern Ireland 2003, 2004, and then obviously Iraq came about. the second invasion of Iraq. And that's when I got kind of wind of what was to come and made the decision to kind of sign off, if you like.
Right, I'm just going to step outside for a piss, mate. I'm going to pause this recording. All right. So what was the reasons that you decided to kind of bring your time to the military in the end?
Well, I was kind of very, very fortunate that I had a few friends that had gone down the SF route and were in the know. So I got a bit of inside information that was what was coming with the Iraq stuff. And I personally thought the Iraq war wasn't going to, I didn't think it was going to matter. I was actually on rear party for the start of the Iraq war. And I had to make a tough decision because obviously what we've just talked about then, I wanted to go on conflicts and be involved in stuff. But I never really, I didn't see myself as being a 22-year man in the military. I've talked to you before. I'm all about experiences, and I just wanted to have as many different experiences as I could possibly do. And when you're in the military, all the experiences are very much the same. You go through a cycle, like we talked about, of doing the same thing and different exercises, different experiences, such, but it's the same rotation. So I was very lucky. I got wind of the close protection market, and I knew a few guys doing it. And it was big bucks. I'm not going to lie. That was a big kind of driving force. As a 24-year-old, I was a bit like, 80, 90 grand a year tax free at the time. And I was like, Jesus, that's like 4 times my salary that I'm on now as a Lance Corporal in the parachute regiment. So I kind of made a bit of a difficult decision. I was like, do I stay in? See, I got offered juniors as a full screw, to go by the OC. It was like, stay in, we'll give you juniors, you can go and get your full screw. And I was like, no, I want to try something different. I always had that option where you could re-enlist after a couple of years if it didn't. So, and I was young enough to get away with that. But as it turns out, I chucked in my notice, had got out and lucky enough to get out to kind of Iraq on the close protection scene.
So what year did you first go out to Iraq?
Well, it's a bit of a funny story, really. A lot of those close protection companies wouldn't. I should have probably done this research before I got out, but typical squaddy. I was like, nah, I'll be all right. I'd actually done antenna rigging as my resettlement course, because that was apparently, as they used to say, it was like, oh, this is the next big thing. You need to get on this. So I did that without any research. A month course up in the Lake District, fixing big satellites to big antennas and stuff, and then never ever used it again. So yeah, I got an interview with a company down in London, and I sat there in this interview, and he says, look, your red book and all your kind of documents, you've left exemplary, you've got a blinding report, but he was like, your age, we don't tend to touch people under 30. And I was like, oh, great. So I'm sat down in London, and he went, who was your kind of, your company commander? And I was like, it was Major such and such. And he was like, oh God, I went to Sandhurst with him. He went, give me a minute. Went out the room, true story, went out the room, came back in. He went, I just spoke to him. He says, you're a top bloke. He says, when can you start? So I was like, well, brilliant. So I went out pretty much. I was already packed there and then, and I flew out, I think, the following day. And then I was there a week, dropped an Australian SAS bloke and got sacked. So that was my hot-headed kind of parachute regiment mentality, realizing I'm not in the paras anymore. In my defense, he was a bully, but I ended up filling him in and getting sacked. So yeah.
So it's all, yeah. I mean, that kind of the 30-year-old kind of is, like you've said yourself a few times, you start to get a certain age and you start to look at different regiments and things like that a bit differently, don't you? But very much in your 20s, you still, I think, hit first, maybe ask questions later, kind of thing.
Yeah, and he wasn't justified. I look back at that person now, and I'm a completely different person. I don't condone anything like that, but he was a bully. He tried it on with me, and I was taking no shit, so I ended up smacking him a few times and getting sacked. Much to my old OC's, he was like, "What have you done?" He was like, "I gave you a gleaming reference. You were there a week." I was like, "Yeah, apologies about that." So that put a little bit of a black mark against my name. But I was lucky enough, was back home, did a few bits and bobs job. I still got paid for that week. I got paid about $2 grand for that week, believe it or not. So crazy, isn't it? so that carried me through, and then until I got an interview with another company, and went out, and I spent about 2 years out there with a low profile kind of PSD team.
Right, so I'm gonna have to do some maths here. So what's that, about 400-500 quid a day?
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, ridiculous money at the time.
And how much at the time would you? What would the Lance Corporal be on at the time? Like just under 30 grand, probably. Was it?
Yeah, probably a bit less than that, maybe 25, 26. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you went out there, then when you went out and did this the surveillance, sorry, what did you say the second job was?
So it's low profile PSD. So your private security detail, but cutting around in your kind of not your usual 4x4. So like Ford Mondeos and stuff like that. Trying to stay under the radar. It was the company that I worked for was run by a couple of legends out of 22. And they basically were one of the first companies to adapt this kind of low profile thing where you blend in with the traffic. And don't highlight yourself. Blacked out windows, everyone had beards, shemagged up, so you kind of blended in when you were kind of moving clients around. So that worked.
Sorry to interrupt. What would that be? So what was the kind of the norm at the time then? If that was an adaptation, what were people normally doing to move?
So the normal kind of what people did in the close protection industry was 3 or 4 armored 4x4s, all bells and whistles, pipping the horns, moving through traffic, really highlighting himself, just being aggressive, moving through traffic, wrong side of roads, kind of shunting vehicles out the way, because that was the nature of how the kind of was. It was fairly lawless back then. No rules of engagement, a bit like the Wild West. So yeah, that was kind of the dumb thing to do then. So this new adaptation of blending in with the traffic, kind of going under the radar, sat there in traffic with everyone else, people walking up and down the side of your vehicles. It worked for a long time until, obviously, like everything, intelligence gets out, people leak stuff out, rumor control, and then it kind of, and I think you'll probably remember the Edinburgh Risks incident on Route Irish, where sadly quite a few guys lost their life, where they get quite ambushed from a particular side on Route Irish. Route Irish, the buyout road from the airport to the green zone, was notoriously known as the most dangerous road in the world for a lot of years, to a point where the US wouldn't go up there in armored vehicles. And I always joke about the fact that I've had 9 lives. And right at the start of working for this company, we were involved in training people, training local nationals, and picking up, because they were setting up the company. Brand new, this company. I was traveling up and down Route Irish in soft skin vehicles, maybe 6 or 7 times a day, just up and down Route Irish. It was bonkers.
And what was like, did you, when you're doing this low profile stuff, did that give you a kind of like almost like a local's eye view of to the stuff happening around you with the military, and because presumably they don't know who you are, so you almost seeing it from like a local's eye view?
Yeah, absolutely, pal. Absolutely. And, you have to be dead careful as well, because, you get the US soldiers not knowing who you are, pointing weapons at you and telling you to get back. So you had to follow what the local population were doing, stay back 30, 40, 50 meters from the back of a US convoy, or you run the risk of getting shot at yourself. So again, it was really, really effective. There was downsides. Like, obviously, if you're in a 4x4 vehicle and you needed to get out of a difficult situation, you had the ability to bounce up these big high curbs and go off road. You didn't have that ability when you're cutting around in maybe a Ford Mondeo, So there was swings and roundabouts, but like I say, for a long period of time, you got away with it, and no one batted an eyelid, and people just sort of glanced at you and then just cracked on.
And what were the kind of people like that you're working with? Was it all British, ex-British blokes?
Yeah, it was pretty much predominantly like all Brits. Royal Marines, worked with quite a few Royal Marines at the start. There wasn't a lot of us in the company. There was probably about 12 of us, and that's being generous to start with. And we were responsible, like I say, for training the local nationals, weapons, first aid, that kind of stuff, and picking up vehicles, basically setting up this company. And then it started to get contracts as it kind of move forward. But it was an interesting time being in the green zone back then, because you get mortared on day-to-day rocket attacks. We used to sit on the roof having a beer watching the mortar attacks coming at night. I mean, it was quite fascinating to watch, and just general stuff like that. And it was a really, really, like, again, back then you're dead blasé about it. You kind of take it in your stride. And I look back at some of the stuff I did then and think, I wouldn't dream of doing it now. It'd scare the shit out of me. And it's just like what we said, you move into your 40s, you get a bit more kind of, I don't know whether it's wisdom, it's knowledge, but back then I didn't give a shit. I got handed an AK-47 when I arrived at Bayap International Airport. He was like, do you know how to use this? I was like, yeah, pretty much. He's like, right, we're jumping in this vehicle, and that was us off to the green zone. There's no formalities and nothing. It was just bonkers.
There's probably no amount of money someone could give you now to do that, right?
No, not at all, mate. No.
No, I've always found that really funny, mate. It's like, I don't know if it's because, if anything, when you're younger, you've got more ahead of you.
I know.
But like, as you get older, you just think, you look at something like that and just think like, yeah, what, for the sake of the difference in pay for an extra fucking pair of trainers or something. Like,
I know it's crazy. It's crazy. And there was one particular, well, I talk about this. It's like, when I say about the 9 lives, and it's like, I've always, for some reason, been at the right place, but at the wrong time, and then got away with something. Like, we used to take it in turns to sign in locals at the checkpoints, because obviously they needed to be escorted. So we'd bring them in, and then we'd train them, maybe 30 or 40 of them. And on this particular day, it was my turn to sign in the local nationals. And for whatever reason, he had the American call sign checkpoints, and then 100 meters in front of them were the local national, the Iraqi army checkpoints. It was like a big gap. And 9 times out of 10, the local nationals army would stop the local nationals at their checkpoint and not let them through. So you'd have to go right to the outer checkpoint to sign them in. On this particular day, they'd been let through, and I was signing them all in at the US checkpoint. And a massive vehicle-borne IED hit the outer checkpoint at that point, killed 17 people. Force of explosion took pretty much all of us off our feet. And if I'd have been up there on that particular, for whatever reason, it would probably killed me. There's no question about it. So I was like, well, that was a lucky one for whatever reason. So I always say, I think, like, I've got a bit of a guardian angel,
When that happened, or when incidents like that happened, well, as obviously the role that you're in, working out there privately, probably you have to have you've then got a different, maybe, from a different way of interacting with different partner forces. So what on that kind of occasion when that happened, what was like, did the American military go and assist, or was it just left that, like, that's the kind of the Iraqis, that's their problem? Like, how did that work?
In all honesty, and I have a lot of respect for our cousins over there, and the kind of the US Army. I've worked with them quite a lot, but that was my first kind of real sort of vision or kind of experience with the US Army. And I don't know what unit it was, but it was chaos. It was a vehicle-borne IED. There was no follow-up sort of ambush or contact from it, but there were US soldiers running up the street shooting like aimlessly as they were moving up towards the checkpoint at nothing. With kit hanging off them, like webbing open, and I was just like, really? It was a bit of an eye opener. Now, I don't know if it was the chaos of the situation. I didn't know how long they'd been in country. Easy to me to judge on a snapshot. I didn't know if that had been, maybe they'd been hit every day for the last 3 or 4, because explosions happened all the time when you're in the green zone. You'd be like, oh, that's another one. And it was probably a car bomb. It could have been a vehicle bomb. It could have been anything. So, I can't really, it'd be wrong of me to say that was, kind of a full picture of it, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? But my experiences of seeing it was chaos, and I was like, God, I hope we don't act like this when shit hits the fan.
Did you ever get hit out there by IEDs or small arms or anything like that?
I've had a couple of IEDs. Yeah, I'm pretty much not completely deaf, but I've got the mute sign tattooed behind my left ear because I'm deaf in this left ear. Like, future contracts, yeah. I had an RPG fired at me on that contract that again hit a bank in about 50 meters in front of my vehicle and detonated. I worked for a company. We got ambushed on Boxing Day, and I always get this wrong. It was either 2008 or 2009 Boxing Day. Drove around into like a busy marketplace and then got ambushed, complex ambush. My vehicle were riddled with, but this was in a armored Land Cruiser, so a bit different.
So, like, what was the reason you were in armored Land Cruisers at that point? Was that?
So I kind of So I did a couple of years with that company, and then I went home for a bit. And I was always a bit like I've always been big into the mental health, and inadvertently I managed to manage it without even knowing I was managing it. Because I know guys that have worked out there for 10, 15 years, solid, and they just end up a mess. Whereas I'd worked for a couple of years, and then I'd have a bit of a break back home, pop back home, do a bit of work back here, whether that might be surveillance, a bit of close protection back here, and then I'd jump on a different contract. So I went on convoys for about a year, 18 months, I think, with a well-known company. I'll not mention any company names, running convoys from the Qasar border with Kuwait up to Baghdad, escorting lorry loads of kit and equipment. And again, that was like, you used to drive up through a bit of a place up there called EFP Alley, where there was like kind of where the EFP, which for those that don't know is like a shaped charge that armor pierces vehicles. It can go through tanks. It's horrible. And we were in like the Ford F-150 trucks and stuff, armored. So yeah, I did that for about 18 months. Interesting. Again, there was a few incidents on that. Nothing major though. And there was a lot of guys that sadly lost their life on those contracts. But again, for whatever reason, I kind of dodged it all, which I was really chuffed about, obviously. And then I went to work for, and I can mention the company because I've had a podcast with the former CEO of that company, Aegis, Aegis Defense Services. And yeah, I went out with them. And they do a lot of people really wanted to work with Aegis because a lot of people left the military because they didn't like all the bullshit that comes with the military. So, the uniform, having to shave, whereas Aegis was exactly that. It was like you were being in another part of the military, really. You had a fitness test. You had a 2-week induction course where you got tested. If you didn't meet the grade, you got sacked off. So you did like contact drills. You had a 2-miler with full kit that you had to pass in a certain time. So the standard of guys that worked for Aegis was really, really good. Whereas some of the older boys that had left the military had let themselves go a bit, didn't want to shave, didn't want to do fitness tests, so they stayed with other companies. But I like the idea of that. I thought it was a professional company. So I went out with them, and as soon as I come off the induction course, they had 2 contracts running at the time. One was called the Matrix contract, which is very, very well known. And then they had a very, very small contract that had 1 team on it called Op Tourist. Now, everyone nicknamed it Op Tourniquet. And I was like, oh, I wonder why they call it that. Anyways, yeah. So me being me going, well, that sounds interesting. Didn't really know what it was. I was like, oh, I'll go on that. And what we were doing was filming for US intelligence. We had 3 armored Land Cruisers. One of them was fitted with a camera on top, with a guy in the back, a South African guy in the back, bless him, and that had a laptop and sort of doing all the filming. And we were filming every street, MSR road in the Baghdad area for US intelligence. So driving around at 30 mile an hour in these, standing out like a bulldog's bollocks in these 3 armored Land Cruisers. Mate, now, when we just talked about looking back, there is not any sum of money that would pay me to do that again.
You're basically doing Google Maps Baghdad.
Pretty much. So any footage, I genuinely believe, and so we were told, that once US intelligence had finished with the footage, it was then going to go on and be sold on to Google Maps. So most of the footage that you will probably see from Google Maps, I've probably been part of.
Mental. So when you were out on these, let's say those 3, armored vehicles, let's say that you did hit an IED or anything. Is there any kind of like quick reaction force that's going to come out to get you? Like how would you get casualties out if you had them? Like, how would you get yourselves out of a situation like that?
So a lot of the contracts, the answer would that be probably not. And there was a lot of shady companies that worked out there. And I know enough people that have been injured in incidents and then they've been left to rot in kind of Iraqi hospitals, and then the US government have had to step in, or the British government, and try and fly them back and stuff like that. Whereas I was quite lucky that the contracts that I worked on, not necessarily the first couple, because that's just the way it was, but when I went to work for the Aegis, because it was a US contract they were on, you got all the sort of bells and whistles of the US government. So you got a really, really good package if you were injured. They really, really looked after you. If you needed air support, you could get an Apache up, and they put one up. So, you had that support. So for that company, if you got injured, you had the backup. You had a quick reaction force. The US Army would come out and help you. You did a lot of work. I carried a Department of Defense badge that gave me the equivalent rank of a US colonel. So I used to flash that in some of the US kind of scoff houses, and now you get to the front of the queue and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it was good. It was good. But yeah, nothing kind of, you still saying that aside, you still don't get the support that you'd probably get, when you're serving in the military, but that was the next probably best thing.
So, just thinking now, when you're out on these, when you're out on these jobs, out on these, not on contracts, rather than tours. Obviously, whenever if a British soldier died in Iraq, an American soldier died in Iraq, it would make the news back home and everything. Was that the case? Because I can't really remember that being the case for contractors, but
no,
was good. And then, because it was an eye opener for me when I went out there, and would be told from the ATO guys and stuff how often it would be that they'd go out to these, civilian contractor companies that had been hit. How often was it that people were getting injured and killed, former British soldiers doing these jobs?
Lots. There was lots. There's lots of recorded incidents, but you're right. It never made the news because it was almost a bit. I mean, if it was nowadays, because of the kind of what's known about the private military companies and how they operate, I think it probably been more. But this was on. It wasn't a new thing when the second Iraq war kicked off, but it was definitely something that was on a mass scale like it had never been heard of before. And like I say, when I had Tim Spicer on, who ran that company, it was unprecedented on that scale. They were the first to kind of do it, and it just opened up pretty much the market. And the close protection market for anyone that wasn't really SF until that point was a closed market. So that's what I mean when I got wind of it. Go out with open dagger and stuff like that, and that's when it kind of opened up the market for everyone. So it started to become kind of more commonly known. But still, no, if people got killed out there, there was lots that you would have never heard of. They'd have maybe been in local papers, because obviously you'd been able to get as much information like you would if a British soldier or a US soldier got killed on an operation with it.
So I've just looked up how many private military contractors were in Iraq in 2006. Actually, I'll give you the number. So the number, you probably already know these, but I'll give the listener the numbers. So in 2006 in Iraq, the US military had 120, almost 129,000 troops. Private military contractors in 2006 in Iraq were 100,000. So it's like having an entire extra army there, essentially, and that's I just think that's kind of really flown under the radar, because obviously of that number, a lot are going to be from all over the world, right? But it wouldn't surprise me, I don't know what you think about this, if we had as many British military, ex-British servicemen in Iraq as we did actual servicemen in Iraq.
I wouldn't be surprised, and once the kind of cat were out the box, and I remember being in Basra on for that week with that first company, because I was down there, and I bumped into some lads from Tupara because they were out there at the same time, and I was cutting around in civvies with a bit of body armor on and an AK-47, and lads were like, "Have you gone 2-2?" And part of me wanted to walt it up and go, "Oh yeah, I'm 2-2 now," but obviously I didn't. But I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm doing this sort of thing." And blokes were like, "Oh, have you got any numbers?" And blokes left 2 and the parachute battalions in droves. I think it decimated the battalions. I think it did this for the lot of the later on as well when it opened up for everyone. It decimated a lot of the British Army. But look, I've always said if you're going to go out there and earn money, you do it. We do things to set ourselves up for the rest of our lives. And we know how British veterans have been treated, sadly. And, you know, I think even back then, veterans were treated not very great and screwed over a bit. So I think guys and girls just thought, you know, sod it. I'm going to go and make a life for myself using the skills I've learned, you know.
Yeah, I think Afghan probably helped retention a lot from that point of view, because then all of a sudden it's something that you can't really do. I mean, to a degree. But so when you were out in Iraq, then how many years did you kind of do out there? Like you said, you had breaks, but what was the kind of the rough period that you were doing this over?
So I 2004 went out. So it was over a 6-year period, 2004 to 2010. I was out in Iraq, and like I say, I'd do a year, couple of years, come back for a few months, do a bit of work back here, and then just for sort of a bit of a break, really, in sort of looking after your kind of, because you do get burnt out doing it. You know, you're constant on your toes. There's incidents happening all the time. There's IEDs, there's ambushes. Even if you're not directly involved, you hear of it. You hear the explosions, and you know you've been on Afghan tours that for short periods of time would having. And I'm not comparing the work that we did out there to the Afghan tours, but it's very, very similar. There was a lot of incidents, and you know how it kind of you struggle and how kind of post-traumatic stress hits and stuff. And I didn't want to be one of those casualties of it. So I kind of inadvertently managed it by doing the breaks. So yeah, 2004 to 2010 on and off. I had a break in the middle to go backpacking around the world with the money I'd saved for 7 months. So I went backpacking around the globe, and that was good. And then I came back out with Aegis again and went on the Colonel's close protection team for about a year before I sacked it.
Did you find it harder and harder to go back, or was it, once you'd had a break, was it all right?
No, because I mean, it was good, and then I got I got involved in relationships and stuff, so it became difficult to leave kind of family members and stuff like that. Even though the money's good and the lure, but you know, as you get older and you see more and more violence and you're involved in more and more incidents, I think your own mortality starts to. You think, you know what, I'm not immortal here. I've dodged a lot of bullets, but your only kind of edge of probability is going to be at some point that you're going to cop one, and no amount of money is going to kind of be worth losing a limb or being paralyzed, or you know, the ultimate sacrifice and losing your life. So for me, 2010, my son was born. He was born 5 weeks early. I was still in country, so I missed his birth. But prior to that, about 2 weeks before his birth, I was driving down south on the close protection, on the Colonel's close protection team, and someone threw an RKG3, which is an armor-piercing stick grenade, like an old Soviet kind of stick grenade, at my vehicle, and it hit the passenger side door as I was driving, and never detonated. And if it had detonated, it'd have killed me and the passenger outright. And I was a bit like, okay. So that was, and I know that's not even that big an incident, but it was almost like, well, you know, I'm pushing my luck here. And I'd already been involved in another RKG3 attack when I was on that op tourist. And this is what I say about being in the right place at the wrong time. I'd swap drivers just because I drove the third vehicle most of the time. I on this particular day, I spoke to him. I said, "Do you want to swap over?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll drive the back vehicle. You drive the front vehicle." We drove out of camp about 4 hours into that day, and he got RKG3'd on his vehicle, and he got fragged through the legs quite badly, and he kind of still suffers with that to this day. And I should have been driving that vehicle, you know, but we just swapped just on the cuff.
So it was that kind of like the birth of your son coupled with that latest near miss was just at that point when you had your son, was that a big kind of shift away from in life priorities at that point?
Yeah, I know. But I had a partner at the time and stuff like that, and you know, you take into account them, but when you've got a son and it's your blood, things change. You've got them to think about, and you know, I kind of at the time I was going to come home, have a few months at home, and then as soon as I got home and reality set in, I was like, you know what, I'm not interested about going back. All the money in the world, I've done my bit. I'd made some good money from it. So I decided to stay home, but that was short lived before the next kind of step. I moved into the different line of work. But
so what was the next one then?
so it was around this time that people literally started to jump ship, no pun intended, from the Iraq, because what was happening with the Iraq, the money was going down. You were teams were getting mixed because that's the way it went. Power was being handed back to the Iraqi government.
Mixed nationalities.
Yeah, a mix of nationalities. So you had a lot more local nationals that were in the teams, cracking lads that would lay down their life for you, but their standards weren't the same as our standards. And that's just the way it is. We're trained to a high standard, arguably the best armed forces on the planet. And sadly, not all other countries are trained to that kind of high level. So it started to become a bit dodgy, started to notice things. Power was handed back to the Iraqi kind of government. So where you were protected under the kind of sort of US government, the umbrella of the US government, you wasn't anymore. And people were starting to get arrested if they did stuff and go into, spending time in cells in Abu Ghraib and stuff like that, and in police cells before the US government came and tried to negotiate you getting out. So a lot was changing. So the anti-piracy was early doors, anti-piracy off the coast of Somalia and stuff. And again, someone contacted me, said, do you fancy a bit of this? So I went and did a few courses that I needed to do, and then ended up flying out to Sri Lanka, I think, and then started jumping on anti-piracy kind of operations back and forth off the coast of Somalia, Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. For about 3 years I did that.
Do you ever have any run-ins with pirates?
There's a couple of occasions, yeah. Now, again, I'm not someone that hell-bent on trying to kill someone. I've never taken another person's life in everything that I've done, thankfully. And I never saw that any different when I was doing the piracy. I'd have been perfectly within my rights on a couple of occasions where pirates have come, past. You've seen weapons, you'd be perfectly in your rights to open fire on them, but and probably kill them if you wanted, because that was the rules of engagement. But I never thought that they were just fishermen at the end of the day. Now I know what I know about the Somali pirates and stuff. I don't know whether they'd probably have the same opinion. I'm pretty certain that we would be executed if they got hold of us, but I was in an elevated position. They posed no real threat to me on some of these ships. So warning shots a lot of the time did the trick, and you didn't need to do anything else. So a few warning shots, if we've been in occasions where we'd fired warning shots at pirates and stuff, and that was enough for them to kind of disappear and move away, And I don't want to live with that on my conscience, that, as much as we all think we're big and tough, and I'm sure it would be for some people bragging rights to say that they've taken someone's life. I didn't want that on my conscience, and I stand by that as well. If you don't have to do it, why would you,
Did you do you enjoy doing the work on the ships?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I have been to some I got stranded in Madagascar for about 5 days. Ended up in a nightclub in Madagascar. All these stories I tell are completely true. There's enough people that know me or that were with me, but I end up in a club pub club in Madagascar where the doorman had an Uzi strapped around his neck. So, just random nights out like that. And it was like, so I got to go to Tanzania, Oman, spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka. So yeah, it was good, a good experience. Towards the end, it got lonely. I think the last 10-week trip I did, I ended up kind of the only English speaker on that ship. So, 10 weeks of not knowing anyone else that speaks English. There's only so much kind of stuff you could do to keep your brain. I used to train like 3 times a day because there was nothing else to do. I was probably the fittest I've ever been by running around the ship, pull-ups, press-ups, just doing stuff just to keep yourself busy.
Prison workouts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, the money started going down, teams started getting mixed. Too many companies with contracts bidding each other.
Sadly, that's what.
When did you decide that? You got in on the gold rush, though.
Oh yes, yeah, and I was very lucky that I worked for the kind of golden eras of them time, and the whole time I was working, I used to work it on the anti-piracy there, where I'd do a month on, a month off, and it was called merchant shipping allowance. So if you work 6 months in the UK and 6 months out the UK, it was tax free. It's called the merchant shipping allowance, so it's completely above board. So I tried to do a month or 6 weeks away, and then I'd come back home. And on the time I was at home, I did sort of surveillance work for BBC Rogue Traders. Did a lot of work for the program BBC Rogue Traders. Did all the background work for them. Did a job for Gordon Ramsay. I talk about the people at work I work with now get bored of me telling the Gordon Ramsay story, but it's one of my only claims to fame. So I worked for Gordon Ramsay on one particular job, following his father-in-law around London, and won Gordon Ramsay millions in court. So yeah, that's my claim to fame.
Well, what's the dip? What's the dip behind that one?
Well, no, basically, it was all in the papers. It's nothing, I'm saying that's not known now. If you Google or 2010 Daily Mail and all that, basically, Gordon Ramsay owned 51% of Gordon Ramsay Holdings, and his father-in-law, a guy called Chris Hutchinson, owned 49% of Gordon Ramsay Holdings. So basically, his father-in-law was allegedly embezzling money out the company, and Gordon Ramsay wanted him following, and he was having an affair as well, allegedly. So I was tasked with following him around London for 2 weeks, pretty much on my jack. I had a few people helping me at various periods, but majority of it was on my own. And yeah, I managed to get all the footage. I can't go into too much detail about the footage that I got, but the footage that I got proved he was having an affair with the accountant for the company. And yeah, I basically, all the footage and reports that I did went to court with Gordon Ramsay, and he won in court and won millions. So I've been trying to get hold of Gordon Ramsay to talk to him, see if I get a free meal at his restaurant, but he never seems to see any of these. So he might see this one.
Yeah, I don't know about that, mate. Yeah, that's awesome. So all right, mate. So when did the kind of transition to fire service come about?
So I've tried for the fire service I seem to do things in threes. So I tried for the fire service 3 years over a 10-year period. First, when I was leaving the military, I applied and got through the interview stage, and then was unsuccessful. Then about 2008, when I was getting a bit bored with the whole Iraq stuff, and like we said, things were changing. So I was always trying to find a way to get back home. Fire service has been something I wanted to do since I was a kid, since one of my primary school friends at the time, his dad was a firefighter, and I was obsessed with it back then. And then I kind of applied for it 2013 while I was away on the ships. Worst interview I've ever had for the fire service, and somehow managed to get through. And yeah, I kind of, while I was floating off an armory off the Gulf of Aden, off Dubai on this floating armory, I got an email saying you've been successful, but they weren't running a third course, so you'd have to apply again next time we recruit. So I was devastated. I'd actually passed the process, and then they weren't running a course that I could go on. So I was like, are you kidding me? So that's when I took the 10-week ship, where I was the only English speaker. And about 7 weeks into it, I got a phone call off a sat phone saying basically I had been successful, from a family member saying I'd been successful. I needed to get back for an interview. So I had to bluff my case of getting off the ship, got off in Saudi Arabia, pay a lot of money to get off the ship. And yeah, got home, had a medical, and then got into the fire service September 2013. I won't say what brigade I'm in, but yeah, I'm a firefighter now. So,
And tell us about the podcast, mate. What was the reasons for you starting that?
So probably the same as you, pal. You know, we kind of, I know loads and loads of guys and girls over the years that have sadly suffered with mental health, PTSD, various other bits and bobs, and I know a lot that have taken their own life, or certainly tried to take their own life as well. So I was a bit like, I always wanted to challenge myself to do something. You know, if I'm not moving forward, I boxed for a lot of years. That was a way of keeping me kind of sane, but now I'm too old and injury ridden. I needed something else to kind of do. So I really fancied the idea of a podcast and raising awareness for kind of mental health issues within the military, sort of veterans communities, emergency services communities, and across the board, really, anything that needs raising awareness, you know, to do with anything I can do to help people. That's what I'm about. I think you get to a certain age, don't you, where you like to, I certainly do, where I feel like I want to give something back now and trying to help as many people as I can. There are selfish reasons as well. I mean, I get to speak to interesting people. I get to come on podcasts like yourself, speak to interesting people like yourself. So there is a bit of a selfish reason behind it, and I'd be lying if I say there wasn't some sort of monetary goal behind it and a business, but I don't make anything from it in a minute. But yeah, it was all about if I can kind of save or help one person struggling by kind of raising the positive messages and creating a bit of awareness. That was kind of like the main reason behind it.
Maybe we all want the Joe Rogan Spotify deal. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah.
So is there anything that we haven't kind of covered today, that anything else, doesn't even have to be about the military, mate, anything else that you want to kind of get out to people?
Yeah, it's a new thing, and it's still new and it kind of hot off the press, if you like. But yeah, I did a podcast with Chris Thrall and Louis Greenall, who were rowing the Atlantic for Scotty's Little Soldiers charity and Homes for Veterans. And inadvertently, by doing the live podcast from the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I was the first person to ever do it. So it is actually an official world record now for the first podcast done with an Atlantic rowing team from the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I don't have it up yet because it's not framed, but it will be up and out and about soon. So yeah, something I'm quite immensely proud of, to be honest. I never thought I'd see myself as a record holder, but yeah.
Congratulations, mate, and congratulations to them as well. Incredible. Can you just let us know where people can find the podcast and see the episodes? I mean, like you mentioned a few binding guests, mate, so I'm sure people are going to want to go over and listen.
Yeah, certainly. So it's the Old Paratrooper Podcast. It's on YouTube. It is on Spotify. There is an Instagram page as well, obviously by the same name, the Old Paratrooper Podcast, and a TikTok channel. Again, which my 15-year-old has had to help me set up because I'm a biff when it comes to technology. But yeah, they're all to feed the kind of YouTube channel and get the kind of subscriptions up and the views up to get the positive messages pushed out there and to the people that need it.